The town of Dry Creek was never kind to strangers, especially not to women who arrived with worn shoes, trembling hands, and nowhere left to go. By the time the sun had begun to sink behind the dusty rooftops, a young woman stood outside the general store clutching a small cloth bag to her chest. Her name was Eliza Hart. Her dress was plain, faded by travel and weather. Her boots were cracked at the heels. The little money she had left was wrapped inside her hands so tightly that her fingers had gone stiff. She had come to Dry Creek with hope. Hope that she might find work. Hope that she might find shelter. Hope that this town would be different from the others. But hope can be a cruel thing when carried too far. The storekeeper had looked at her bag, then at her face, then at the few coins in her palm. "That won't buy enough for a meal," he said flatly. Eliza swallowed and tried to keep her voice steady. "I only need a little flour, maybe some beans. I can work to repay the rest." The man gave a short laugh, not a warm one. "This is a store, not a charity house." A few people standing nearby turned to watch. One woman smirked behind a gloved hand. A ranch hand near the hitching post shook his head and looked away, as if hunger was shameful to witness. Eliza lowered her eyes. She was used to hard days. She was not used to being looked at like she was less than a person. "I can sweep," she said softly, "or stack crates. I learned quickly." The storekeeper moved toward the door and pulled it halfway shut. "I said no." The wooden bell above the entrance gave a sharp little chime as the door closed in front of her. No one spoke. The street seemed to grow quieter around her, though wagons still rolled and horses still shifted in the dust. Humiliation has a strange way of drowning out the rest of the world. Eliza stood still for a moment, then stepped back from the porch. She would not beg. Not again. Not ever again. She walked slowly toward the water trough near the side of the road and sat on the low edge of it, her cloth bag resting in her lap. Inside the bag were 2 spare dresses, a brush with 3 broken teeth, and the last letter her mother had ever written her. She had not eaten since morning, and even then it had only been a piece of stale bread on the stagecoach. The evening air cooled quickly as the light shifted gold across the town. People passed her, most without a glance. A few looked at her and then away.
Dry Creek had decided what she was before anyone had asked her name. A shadow fell across the ground near her shoes. Eliza looked up. A man stood a few feet away, broad-shouldered and still, with a dark hat low over his eyes. Dust clung to his boots and the hem of his coat. He carried a sack of feed over one shoulder as though it weighed nothing at all. He did not speak right away. That, somehow, made him different from the others. Most people hurried to judge. This man seemed to wait. Finally, he set the sack down near the hitching rail and looked toward the closed store door, then back at her. "You asked for flour," he said. His voice was low and quiet, not cold, not overly kind, just steady. Eliza straightened a little. "I did." He glanced at the bag in her lap. "And beans." She nodded once. The man studied her face, not in a rude way, but in a way that suggested he was trying to understand something. "Did you travel far?" Eliza almost told him it was none of his business. Almost. But something in his expression stopped her. "Far enough," she said. He accepted the answer without pushing for more. That earned more trust than a dozen soft words might have. The man lifted the sack again and reached for the store door. He stepped inside without another word. Eliza frowned slightly. A minute later, he came back out carrying a paper bundle tied with twine and a small tin wrapped in cloth. He walked over and held them out to her. She stared. "I can't take that." "It's flour, beans, coffee, and a little salt." "I said I can't take it." His gaze remained calm. "I didn't say it was free." Eliza hesitated. "What do you want for it?" He tilted his head toward the far end of the street where the road opened toward the fields beyond town. "Come feed my sons." She blinked. For a moment, she thought she had heard him wrong. What? The man shifted the feed sack to his other shoulder. "My boys are at home with my father. Supper's been poor all week. I can manage cattle and fences, but my cooking offends decent people." Despite herself, Eliza gave the smallest laugh. The sound surprised both of them. The man's mouth moved, not quite into a smile, but close. "You can keep the food," he said. "In return, you make one meal. After that, you can leave if you want." Eliza looked at the bundle in his hand, then at the road beyond town.
This could be foolish. This could be dangerous. Life had taught her many things, but one lesson had carved itself deepest. A woman alone could not afford careless trust. Perhaps the man sensed that fear. He took one step back, giving her space instead of closing it. "My name is Jonah Mercer," he said. "Mercer Ranch, 2 miles east. Ask anyone." Eliza glanced toward the street. A gray-bearded blacksmith near the corner had clearly been listening. He caught her eye and gave one small nod. "It's true," he said. "Widower, 2 boys, mean with biscuits." A faint murmur of amusement passed from someone nearby. It was the first moment that the town had spoken around her without cruelty. Eliza looked back at Jonah. "Why me?" Jonah's answer came without delay. "Because hungry people should eat. And because you looked at that store door like you were trying not to break." Those words entered her heart more gently than pity ever could. He had noticed, not just her hunger, her effort, her pride, her struggle not to fall apart where everyone could see. Eliza lowered her eyes, afraid that if she met his gaze too long, she might cry in the middle of the street. She hated crying in front of strangers. Jonah waited. He did not rush her. He did not sweeten the offer. He simply stood there like a man who meant what he said and would accept whichever answer she gave. At last, Eliza nodded. "1 meal," she said. "1 meal," he agreed. The road east of Dry Creek stretched under a sky painted in amber and fading rose. Jonah's wagon moved slowly over the hard earth, its wheels humming softly in the dust. Eliza sat beside him on the wooden bench, the paper bundle resting in her lap. For a while, neither of them spoke. Ahead, the land opened wide and quiet. Fences cut across the fields in long, tired lines. A stand of cottonwoods bent gently near a creek bed. Farther off, a ranch house came into view with warm light in 2 of its windows. "It's not much to look at," Jonah said. Eliza studied the place. It was weathered, but cared for. The porch leaned slightly on one side. The barn roof needed patching. Yet there was something honest in the way it stood against the evening wind. "I've seen worse," she said. Jonah glanced at her, and this time there was no doubt. He smiled. By the time the wagon reached the yard, 2 boys had already burst through the front door. "Pa!" They raced toward the wagon with the fierce energy only children can carry at the end of a long day. One looked to be about 8, the other maybe 6. Their hair was dark and untidy, and both wore patched shirts and hopeful expressions. Then they saw Eliza. Both boys stopped. The younger one blinked up at her. "Who's that?" Jonah climbed down first. "A guest." The older boy narrowed his eyes in serious inspection. "For supper?" Eliza wasn't sure whether he meant as company or as cook. Jonah seemed to understand the confusion. "She's helping with supper." The younger boy broke into a grin. "Then we're saved!" Eliza looked down to hide another smile. An older man stepped out onto the porch, slower than the boys, but no less observant. His back was slightly bent, though his eyes were sharp. "You remembered to come home before dark," he said dryly. Jonah took the feed sack from the wagon. "I aim to impress you at least once a season. The old man's gaze shifted to Eliza, and she felt at once weighed and measured, but not harshly, more like a man deciding whether she had been sent by trouble or providence.
"Evening," he said. "Eliza Hart," she replied. He nodded once. "Silas Mercer." No one asked her where she came from. No one asked why she was alone. For that kindness alone, Eliza might have wept. Inside, the kitchen was simple and warm. A cast-iron stove still held heat from the day. Dried herbs hung near the window. On the table sat a bowl of potatoes, 2 onions, and what looked like yesterday's bread trying not to become tomorrow's stone. Jonah set the flour and beans down. "This is what I could get on short notice." Eliza rolled up her sleeves. "It'll do." The boys hovered nearby as she worked, watching as though she were performing some impossible trick. She mixed dough with sure hands, stretched what little there was into something useful, simmered the beans with onion and salt, and cut the bread into slices to toast in a pan with drippings Jonah found in the pantry. The younger boy leaned closer. "How do you know all that?" Eliza kept kneading. "Because when there isn't much, you learn how to make it enough." Silas, seated near the stove, looked up at that. Jonah said nothing, but she felt him watching. Not in suspicion, in recognition. When supper was finally placed on the table, the boys stared as if she had laid out a feast from a governor's house. Jonah bowed his head. "Eat before it cools." The younger boy took one bite and closed his eyes. "I love her." His older brother kicked him lightly under the table. "You can't love someone after one bite." "Yes, I can." Silas hit a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar and aching. It had been a long time since a table had felt like more than a place to sit. After supper, she rose to clear the dishes, but Jonah stood as well. "You cooked, I'll wash." She looked at him in surprise. "Men can wash plates," he said. Silas grunted. "Some better than they cook." The boys laughed. The house, for a little while, felt full. When the dishes were done and the boys had been sent to wash up for bed, Jonah walked Eliza onto the porch. Night had settled over the ranch. Crickets sang from the grass. A lantern burned softly beside the door. "You can sleep in the spare room," he said. Eliza turned toward him. "I said one meal." "You also haven't eaten properly in at least a day and a half." His voice remained gentle. "No woman rides back to town in the dark from my house, not while I have a roof." She folded her hands tightly. "You don't know anything about me." Jonah rested one hand on the porch rail. "Then tell me what you want me to know." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "I worked in a boarding house in Amarillo. The owner died in spring. His son sold the place and dismissed everyone. I tried 2 other towns. In one, they wanted work for no pay. In the other..." She stopped. Jonah didn't press. "In the other," she said at last, "kindness came with conditions." The silence that followed was not empty. It was respectful. Jonah looked out toward the dark shape of the barn. "Then hear me clearly, Eliza Hart. There are no conditions here." She searched his face for signs of falsehood. She found only steadiness. "Stay the night," he said. "Leave in the morning if that suits you. Stay longer if you find reason. Either way, no one here will close a door in your face." The words settled into her heart so deeply it frightened her, because part of her wanted to believe them, and wanting to believe was always the beginning of risk. A small sound came from the screen door behind them. The younger boy stood there, rubbing one eye. "Miss Eliza?" She turned. He held up a ragged stuffed rabbit by one long ear. "If you leave before breakfast, can you say goodbye first?" Something inside her gave way. Children had a way of asking simple questions that touched the deepest wounds. Eliza knelt so she could meet his gaze. "What's your name?" "Caleb." "And your brother?" "Ben. He acts older because he is older by almost 2 years." From inside the house, Ben called out, offended, "I heard that." Caleb lowered his voice.
Will you say goodbye? Eliza looked at the child's earnest face, then at Jonah standing quietly behind him. Yes, she whispered. I'll say goodbye. Caleb nodded, satisfied, and padded back inside. Jonah opened the door for her. The spare room's at the end of the hall. That room was small but clean. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Someone had placed a pitcher of water on the washstand. Through the window, Eliza could see the moonlight silvering the pasture fence. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for months. No one had asked anything from her tonight except supper. No one had looked at her with hunger disguised as generosity. No one had treated her like she was a burden to be tolerated. Somewhere down the hall, the boys laughed at something Silas muttered in his sleep-rough voice. The sound was so ordinary that it felt like a miracle. By morning, the ranch had changed color. Sunlight stretched across the fields in pale gold. The air carried the smell of coffee, hay, and fresh earth. Eliza awoke slowly, disoriented for just a moment before memory returned. She dressed, braided her hair, and stepped into the kitchen. Ben and Caleb were already at the table. Good, Ben said with visible relief. You didn't leave.
Caleb pointed triumphantly. I told you she'd say goodbye first. Silas sat near the stove with a tin cup in his hand. Morning, girl. Morning. Jonah stood at the counter slicing bread. He looked over his shoulder when she entered, and his expression softened in a way so quiet that she nearly missed it. There's coffee if you want some. Eliza nodded. Thank you. Breakfast was simple. Bread, eggs, and preserves from a jar Silas had opened with unnecessary force. The boys talked over one another about a calf in the south pasture, a broken latch on the chicken coop, and whether Miss Eliza knew how to ride. Enough, Jonah said, though not sternly. Let her breathe. Eliza wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Warmth touched her fingers, then moved slowly inward. She should leave after breakfast. That had been the plan. That had always been safest. But safety and loneliness often wore the same coat. After the meal, she carried plates to the basin before anyone could stop her. Jonah joined her with the pans. You don't have to decide anything this morning, he said quietly. She looked at him. You talk like you know I'm arguing with myself. Aren't you? Eliza almost smiled. Maybe. Jonah dried a plate with a cloth. The boys need someone around who can cook better than me. Silas needs someone who can pretend to laugh at his stories. And he paused. She waited. I need someone in this house who doesn't feel like they're halfway out the door. The honesty of it left no room for defense. Eliza set a plate down carefully. You make it sound simple. It isn't, he said, but it might still be good. Outside, the boys shouted from the yard. A horse whinnied in the barn. The ranch woke around them, alive with ordinary need. For the first time and longer than she wanted to admit, Eliza imagined what it might feel like not to be passing through, not to be tolerated, not to be watched with suspicion, but to stay. Jonah must have seen the thought move across her face because he said nothing more. He simply handed her the last dry plate. Sometimes silence is kinder than persuasion. By noon, she had helped Caleb mend a torn shirt, shown Ben how to thicken stew without wasting flour, and walked with Silas to the garden patch behind the house, where the tomatoes were trying their best against stubborn soil. By evening, the boys had already begun speaking as if she had always been there. Miss Eliza likes the red mare. Miss Eliza says beans need soaking. Miss Eliza laughs when Caleb lies. I was not lying, I was improving the story. Even Jonah laughed at that. The sound reached her before she was ready for it. She turned toward him, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. There was no promise in that silence, no grand declaration, only recognition, the kind that begins softly and changes everything before either heart is prepared to name it.
That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Eliza stood on the porch once more. The stars burned clear above the dark ranch land. Jonah stepped out beside her, not too near. "Will you leave in the morning?" he asked. She thought of the general store door shutting in her face. She thought of Caleb asking her to say goodbye. She thought of Ben pretending not to worry. She thought of Silas making room at the table without asking for her story first. And she thought of Jonah, who had seen her breaking and chosen not to let her do it alone. When she answered, her voice was soft. "Not tomorrow." Jonah let out a breath, almost like a prayer he had not meant to pray aloud. "That's enough," he said. And somehow, beneath the wide western sky, it was. Because some homes do not begin with walls. They begin with a meal, a quiet offer, and one door that opens after too many have closed.